everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on the climate change. We have our world famous speaker, Dr. Michael Rothschild, as well as we have our honorable professor, Professor David Smith. I would like to give chance Dr. Michael Rothschild. Dr. Michael Rothschild, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you clearly. Can you hear me clearly? I just moved
Yes.
spots. They changed the lighting system in here. It's very nice to see you again, Dr. Sheriff. And David, it's great to meet you too. I'm here in China, in Guangzhou, and it's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Rothschild, what type of project you are doing for climate change? What you want to share
Well,
with our audience?
yes, we opened up a nonprofit NGO, Michael Rothschild Foundation, in Jerusalem, in Israel. And growing up, I own a for-profit business as well. But growing up, I had obviously I'm bipartisan during when I speak like this. But John Kerry really influenced me, and some of the other guys that were in climate. They really left a lasting impact on me as I was growing up. Um, Not too many people believed it. Over the last several years, but it's obviously that there's something going on temperature-wise, and not just temperature-wise, carbon-wise. And after visiting Davos and Switzerland, the World Economic Forum, and several other conferences, it really just makes sense. There's a lot of excess buildup. There's a lot of heat. There's a lot of sun. And it didn't used to be this way, even growing up. And I don't know that much about the melting glaciers and all that. I just know that it's very hot, and so that's part of the nonprofit. One of the sections of the nonprofit Michael Rothschild Foundation that we'd like to focus on, and I think anything that can lower the temperature. Even for just normal people like myself, just going outside, and David was just mentioning it's an all-time record high in Austin, Texas. So it's just miserably hot, and there's something going on. So climate's definitely part of our NGO. I'm an expert on climate. I just know that it's a very important topic, and it's an extremely important topic to talk about. It's midnight here in China, and it is to me. I think this is the first time I've come live on with anyone actually in a really long time, but this is a very important topic, and I'm anxious to hear what both of you guys have to say. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Mr. David Smith. What you want to discuss today?
Well, Sharif, as we've talked about on many of our programs, climate change actually refers to the long-term shifts in temperature and the weather patterns. And these are climate change that can be driven from a lot of different areas. And some can be natural climate change shifts, such as changes in the sun's activity or volcanic eruptions and others. But really, since the mid to late 1800s, human activities have been one of the main drivers of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. And we know from prior shows and everything that this type of fossil fuels generate a greenhouse gas emission that acts like a blanket wrapped around the earth and traps the sun's heat and rising temperatures. This type of greenhouse gases, including climate change, including looking at carbon dioxide and methane and others that are going into it. There has been a lot of effort over the last 30 years to cut down on using gasoline, building cleaner gas, cutting back on coal, power generation, other things, which has some impact, but we're still headed the wrong direction on climate change and what's happening there. We see that the growth of cities and things are causing part of this because we're cutting down forests and we're clearing land that can help with climate change. Agriculture, oil and gas are the major places you see methane going. In some of the sectors, such as transportation, manufacturing, buildings, and actually agriculture in a funny way, are among the main sectors that are causing these greenhouse gas emissions. And, the average temperature of the Earth's surface is now about 1.1 degrees warmer than it was in the late 1800s. And that was before the Industrial Revolution. And it's warmer than at any time in what they believe the last 100,000 years. The last decade, from 2011 to 2021, was the warmest on record. And each of the last 4 decades have been warmer than any before it. So we're seeing this change going there. And, people are experiencing climate change in many different diverse ways. It affects our health, our ability to grow food, our housing, safety, work. It was mentioned earlier by Michael about the climate change I'm experiencing here in Austin right now. And we have our highest temperature ever recorded here, which is causing a lot of our systems to fail and other things like that. So we see it close and personal. And we really see others, such as people in developing countries and others, are experiencing the same type of climate change as we are in more developed countries too. And we're beginning to see some things like saltwater intrusion into other systems as part of climate change, sea level changes really pulling out there, and the impact of climate change in growing crops and moving things forward. Because the goal coming out of the United Nations as others is net zero, and net zero means is we're going to cut the carbon reductions to zero, effectively, to do it there. And in a series of the different United Nations meetings and others, there is a whole game plan laid out to beginning to achieve that. But if I just look at some of the forecasts and the projections and that I follow as a professional futurist, we are seeing that we could have over a 2-degree temperature raise by the end of the century, even with some of the efforts we're going. So we have a huge challenge, but we already know many of the solutions, and many are being worked on in labs and at universities and corporations and governments all the time. So the United Nations put together a framework on climate change. They put a sustainable development goals in place. The Paris Accord and others have come in there, and outputs from all the COP meetings to help us put in places to achieve these goals. This last COP began look at how do you fund some of these initiatives in the developing world, which do not have, in many instances, the ability to fund any of them. So, the bottom line in climate change today is that we have to begin to do something now. We can take the actions now, but if we wait, we're going to pay a lot more in the future. And there will be things that we probably can never recover from with environmental impact and changes during this next time period. So Sharif, let me use that as my introduction, and let me give it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Raw. Mr. Raw.
Thank you and good morning. Yeah, climate change. Well, we're certainly experiencing a series of events here in the United States that are related to climate change, floods. I'm surrounded by fires at the moment. I can't even go outside. And of course, we had the Maui situation, which was pretty dire. I'm going to take a different tack. That we've kind of, to my view, we've kind of beat to death sources of climate change. And the fact of the matter is as long as we can't operate strategically, our ability to mitigate climate change is almost non-existent. We tend to operate tactically as a race, and as individuals. We go after the things that we can address immediately, but things that are going to create a problem out decades, we're not going to focus on. And the ways you deal with climate change, the fixes take as long as the problem does. So in other words, if you were institute a fix today, chances are the benefits of that fix would not appear for decades. Same thing with climate change itself. The prognosis is in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, depending on who you're talking to, there are going to be dire problems. Well, we're not really interested in problems that are out over several decades. It's a shame. We should be. But the fact of the matter we are not. And perhaps that's a fault of education. We do not, to my knowledge, do a great job of teaching kids to think strategically. Everything's tactical. You have to study for a test, and often you wait to the night before to do that study, procrastinating to the last minute, and that doesn't seem to blow back on you very often, though it certainly did for me when I was in college. Lack of sleep did not lead to good test performance. But the fact of the matter is we do not think strategically. And if you want to fix problems like climate change, you have to get people to think strategically. People have to be willing to sacrifice today for a benefit that might not even occur in their lifetime. And there's really problematic, because how many people do you know are willing to sacrifice today for something that they will never benefit from? So it does suggest we're wired badly, and fixing that should probably be one of the priorities of society, is to make sure that the following generations can think strategically and make decisions for the betterment of the race long term. But we're not there yet. And my job typically is to pick a path of correction that can actually be executed. And my view is right now mitigation is our really only viable choice. And we certainly saw the issue in Hawaii. Hawaii, when they had the fire, they had sirens. People were trained to listen to the sirens and respond to tsunamis. And so the government made a decision not to use the sirens for the fires, because they were afraid if they used the sirens for the fires, people would run towards the fires as opposed to away from them. I'm not sure that actually would have happened given the fire was visible. But regardless of that, I can certainly understand the logic. But what was the problem? Well, the problem is they never did fire drills. They never considered the fact that there could be a fire, and even though we've had fires all over the world now as a result of climate change, the Hawaii, for whatever reason, never decided to do fire drills, and simply doing fire drills would have saved a lot of the lives that were otherwise lost, because people didn't know where to go. People were jumping into the ocean. People were running towards the fire. People didn't evacuate quickly enough. And the fire overcame them because it was moving so fast, and they died. And if we look at how fire drills are done, and they're rarely done on a city level these days. I remember when I was growing up, we did nuclear bomb drills, though I still think that hiding underneath my desk behind a glass wall was probably not the best way to protect myself from a nuclear blast. The fact of the matter is, at least we did drill, so as foolish as they were. But the fact of the matter is we're going to be dealing with major weather events, and we should be pivoting to mitigation, and that means we need to start building up infrastructure to fight the kinds of problems we're going to have near term, not long term. Problems like being able to supply clean water, problems like being able to supply water to firefighters that are trying to put the fires out. So we saw in Hawaii, when the power lines went down, the pumps that created water pressure also went down, and they had no water pressure in the lines. And so the firefighters that did show up and try to fight the fire had no water to fight the fire with. That's nuts. And yet simply running through simulations and drills would have determined this ahead of time. And they would have been able to mitigate the problem. I should point out that since the Maui disaster, I've noticed here that we've got crews going around testing all the fire hydrants. I've never seen the fire hydrants tested before, but at least our municipality has said, hey, when was the last time we tested the fire hydrants to make sure they work? I discovered they haven't tested them in decades, and decided to go out and start testing fire hydrants to make sure the fire hydrants would work if we actually need them. It's one of those things that seems so damned obvious, but often people don't think or prioritize them until there's a disaster. Again, showcasing our way of looking at a problem tactically. The fire in Maui woke people up to the fact they needed to test the fire hydrants. But ideally, you would want some way to know, without having to have a disaster, that you should be operating to prevent the disaster from happening to you. Now we do have technology that do this. We have large scale simulation capability in the metaverse, so we can actually model things like how you would do a city evacuation. I mean, think about it. If you had to evacuate your existing city, how do you think it would go? Where would you go? Do you have a go bag that's ready? And which direction would you go? Which roads would you drive on? What things would you grab? Have you thought of any of that? Most of us have not. And the fact of the matter is when you have an evacuation, which typically happens, is the people farthest away from the problem clog up the transportation arteries, so the people that are close to the problem can't get out. If you look at how people flow onto a freeway, people flow onto it all at once in a disaster, and that means you're going to get gridlock almost immediately because freeways can't handle the load. What should happen is a phased approach where the people that are closest to the disaster are given priority and they get access to the freeway early on, and the people that are farthest away from the disaster wait until the freeway clears, and so they can go. That way everybody gets out, not just the people that are farthest away from the disaster. But we don't drill for that. In fact, we don't even have a technology deployed that could ask people to wait. California has stoplights that could kind of be used to relegate traffic. But as we've seen with regard to how they get gridlock, they don't really work all that well. And people often ignore those stoplights when they're in a hurry. And when you see a disaster, you are always in a hurry. So the chance, even when we put stoplights in and tried to phase the population in disaster, chances are everybody would ignore the stoplights. They panic, flood the freeway. We'd have gridlock. And again, we'd have thousands upon thousands of dead people that wouldn't be dead that they just did it properly. So in the end, we're facing a relatively dire situation where we're going to have increasingly high climate events and increasing inability to deal with them, which makes no sense. If climate was Russia and fires were their preferred weaponry, we would have a nuclear bomb kind of development effort to create technology to mitigate the problem. But for whatever reason, we treat natural disasters as if there's nothing we can do about them. I mean, nothing strategically we can do about them. We don't treat them like we would treat an opponent in a war where we spin up resources. We try to develop new weapon systems, in this case, weapon systems to fight fire, weapon systems to allow you to evacuate large portions of the population very rapidly, and infrastructure that can survive the climate event. If we're faced with a nuclear disaster, we do this. And remember, Russia and Ukraine were both rebuilt after the bomb dropped on Hiroshima to survive nuclear attack. Well, why aren't we rebuilding cities or restructuring cities to survive a fire event like Maui just had? In fact, we had problems even after the 1903 earthquake, changing the building code to build for earthquakes. We did it in California. I should say it was before my time, but California eventually did it. But even then, there was a lot of pushback on whether or not it was necessary and whether or not it should be done. It got done, and now buildings built in California to a large extent are designed to survive a Category 7 earthquake. In other words, they did learn and they did implement, but that's not the gold standard everybody's following with regard to fires. I look at the fires around me, and I've seen these cities wiped out, and then they rebuilt. They rebuilt with the same kind of wooden structures, shake roofs that were problematic when the fire came by the first time, as if they're acting as if the fire will never occur again. And yet every summer now we have major fires. It's not even well, what if a fire occurs? This has become a seasonal event here, where literally, it's the AQI here is up into the 200s. You're not even supposed to be outside, and in some parts of the state, it's drifted into the 400s, where you're really not supposed to be outside. That's horrible for your lungs. Yet, how many of our homes have filtration systems that can handle this level of pollution? Mine does. I've got a medical grade filtration system in my house, so I'm actually pretty comfortable. But I also have full battery backup in case power goes down, and I have a source of water in case I need that water to put out a local fire. But I'm the exception, not the rule. And the fact of the matter is, everybody needs to start thinking about what it is they're going to do in a disaster and what might happen, for instance, if you can't get insurance to protect against it. We just saw the state of Florida, the insurance providers, by and large, all exited the state. So the next hurricane that comes in and levels houses, a lot of people are going to be homeless because they're not going to have the money to rebuild. Their other choice would be to take the money they're saving on insurance and use them to harden the homes so they could withstand the high winds. Aren't they doing that? Not even a little bit. So in the end, we continue to look at these underlying problems, and while we talk about them a lot and we talk about doing things to prevent climate change, we're not even doing the things we should be doing to prevent the outcomes of climate change and make sure that our civilization can survive, our cities can survive, and even our homes will remain standing after an event. That's problematic. And so my view is, rather than continuing to pound on things we can't change, the petrochemical industry is way the hell too strong. We're bouncing off that every day of the week. They fund the politicians to a level that apparently the citizens can't counter. And the petrochemical industry is far better at marketing than those that are fighting for climate change. And the end result is they've been able to discourage a great number of the efforts that should be in place to stop the petrochemical industry from causing harm. At the very least, we should be charging the industry for the damage they do and charge them to correct it, though arguably that would put them out of business. So in the end, my view is we should now shift. We bounce our heads off this. I'm not saying we shouldn't be mitigating, but I think much of our effort, shouldn't be trying to reverse climate change, but that much of our effort should switch to mitigation. And we should be ensuring that people are thinking strategically, they're trained to think strategically, and individually protecting themselves against the harm that will come. Because if they don't, we're going to have more Maui events, more dead people that shouldn't be dead, and that next dead person could be you. I'll pass the hat.
Thank you. Dr. Michael Rothschild, there are many interesting aspects already Mr. Rob and Mr. David actually discussed. So World Talent Economy Forum, beside the dialogue, we want to take more action in emerging economy who has effect for climate change. Let's say India, Bangladesh, Maldives, they have heavily affected by the climate change. So what type of project we can develop to solve this climate related problem? And what's your thought about energy problem solution?
Yeah, this is a very interesting. I'm going to just go off exactly what David and Rob said. First of all, David, I'd like to congratulate you for recognizing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I thought I might have been like one of the only Americans, after pulling out of the Paris climate. I mean, Trump's my family and, my choice, but, all political stuff aside, when you pull out of things like the Climate Accord in Paris, there's people that believe in climate, like Rob said. I mean, there's fires all around him, and there's people that are kind of self-centered. They just, make only America versus the rest of the world. And like also Rob said, if this was Russia, if we were trying to defend ourselves, I really like what both of you said, first of all, because you recognize this, number one, the Sustainable Development Goals. And Rob, you recognize the preventive approach to this whole matter. It's not like we can just solve the climate crisis. We have to be prepared. I'm a general surgeon, and trauma surgery, we always teach, stop, roll. In school we would teach, when I was growing up, we learned how to, if there was a fire, we would stop and roll, and, just preventive measurements of how you can actually prevent catastrophes, whether it be on a city level, and then the rebuilding and the infrastructure. And that's, I believe, what Dr. Sheriff's question was. I think it's, it's tragedy that would happen in Maui, but I also think of it as a new opportunity to build a newer, safer city, smart cities. They're being built all over the world. I mean, I'm here in China. There's brand new technology all over the place, and many other cities that I've been through across the world. And I believe that climate change is real. It's absolutely real. You just can go outside and feel. I mean, you're in fires and so forth. A lot of my friends are in Montana fighting fires and so forth. So preventive approach, recognizing that there is a problem. Like an alcoholic, first you have to recognize that there is a problem. So if you don't recognize that there's a problem and you sit back and you pretend like, everybody's driving their jets around and, trying to, we're trying to solve it's not a mystery what's going on. It's a war, and it's a war between the fossil fuel and all the different things that are causing the problem. At the same time, we need to prevent, just like Rob. So both what what David and Rob are saying is exactly right. How you put the infrastructure back in place. There's several organizations. The most powerful, I was at the COP27 in Egypt. There's a lot of different ideas. There's solar, there's wind, but if we don't attempt and start somewhere, rather than just continue fossil fuels, I think we're already in serious trouble already. So the faster and the sooner we implement different things. So to go cold turkey, to go down to zero, I'm not sure if we can do that. To cure cancer, like Biden said, or just incorporate everything electricity. I don't know. I can't control that, but what I can say is that we can control ourselves, and we can recognize the recognition that there's a problem is the main thing. And if people don't recognize, then they think that people are either they're part of the COP27, they're stealing, or David's just in Texas, it's too hot, or Rob's over in California, there's fires all the time, but they haven't been. So part of the rebuilding is the education of what's really happening. And younger people like myself, and even younger people than myself, they haven't been around the bush, and they don't have the wisdom that Rob and David do, Dr. Sheriff, and they haven't seen catastrophic disasters like in Pakistan or other places. It could very easily happen. And then you also have to think, and I don't want to cross any borders or step on anybody's toes or give any intel out or something like this, but you also have to think about catastrophes in war. Is this HAARP and different things that they're controlling with, temperatures, and hey, we're going to send a hurricane over here, or we're going to wipe out all of this over here. And you also have to think that, we can control different temperature environments. It is some of this, like biological medical warfare. Is it, is it temperature and is it this type of warfare? So, there's several different angles, but bottom line, you have to be aware. And if you're not aware that it's not hot outside, then truly there's something wrong with you. Because you can go to any city. You can be in David City, you can be in Rob City, you can be in Guangzhou, you can be in Shanghai, you can be in Jerusalem, you can be in Bangladesh, and clearly you understand that there's something that wasn't there 10 years ago. So my whole point of rebuilding is, fine, you can put gadgets and widgets and sensors and beeps and bumps and all the different things and funds and everything else, but bottom line, I'm a doctor. And you're a doctor, and it starts with education. We have to continue to educate. And if people make fun of, we got to get down to zero or something, let's just try to educate by acknowledging that there is a problem. And once people acknowledge that there's a problem, and their houses get taken away, and they see what happened in Maui, even if it was intentionally caused or not intentionally caused, then I think that we can put a barrier up through education. And I believe that's the way to go, is to basically make people aware of climate change and to hold it strong, to hold the stance strong, whether it's Republican, Democrat, whether it's Russia, Ukraine. It doesn't matter where it's, which government's involved. It doesn't matter if it's an NGO or a for-profit. It has to be recognized that there's something going on that wasn't going on before, and it's destroying animals, it's destroying humans, and it's no one's benefiting from the destruction and the heat and climate. I want to make one more comment before I turn the mic over, and this might sound really far-fetched. And when my dad told me in the beginning, it did sound far-fetched, and it's not something that I hold dear to my heart. But other planets supposedly are too hot, right? And so, did they come here because our planet wasn't hot and now it's getting hotter? There's other planets that we can't go to. We can't go to the sun. It's too hot. There's other places in the stratosphere or, up there that we can't go to because it's too hot. So we can't get close to certain things because it's like an oven. So, we just like a little kid, you'd have to teach not to get close to that oven. We need to make people aware and educate them that climate change is real, and it's so real that people have to buy land up in the United States just to grow their crops because they can't afford the water. There's no water in their countries, and they ship the foods and stuff back there. So it's becoming a huge problem, actually. And I've seen this, like I said, at COP27. I've seen this at the World Economic Forum. And it seems as though there's a lot of people against both of those groups in the United Nations. And like we mentioned earlier, the Paris Accords, we would pulled out of that, our own family and so forth. I just think that education and making more meetings and more recognition and more funds, more research, more preventative things like Rob's talking about, and more recognition of the Sustainable Development Goals. At least somebody has a plan of mitigation and a plan mapped out. So that's my 2 cents on it as a physician and as a human being, actually.
Dr. Sharif, I was reading your lips, so thank you. No, Michael, great comments there. And one of the big changes that I was very happy to see at COP27 that you announced was the movement to begin supply money to the rest of the world to begin to deal with this. One of the things that I have talked about for decades in the United States and in some of the professional societies I've been elected fellows in and things, is that we live in a world that is really controlled by systems of systems. Just think today, everything is not just a system, but it's become a systems of systems. And that when you look at climate change, it is totally dominated by the concept of everything's a system of systems. And the fact that we could go into where you are today, China, which is still the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. And if we take that to net zero today and do nothing else to the rest of the world, would it have effect? Yes. Would it solve the problems? No. Because what we have to do is attack this as a global challenge, not one for any one city, one company, one country, but it's a global challenge. And it's not confined to any region. And the concept of systems of systems is so applicable here, and is one that I hope when we see the next COP come up and others like that, they begin to apply more broadly to solve this problem. Because climate change cannot be fixed with point solutions. It has to go to a system of systems approach. And Rob's heard this, Dr. Sharif's heard this. One of my mentors, Dr. George Kosmetsky, advocated the concept of the technopolis. The technopolis is pulling together the commercial sectors, large and small, the government bodies, the financial bodies, and academia to tackle complex systems problems. The technopolis concept is what changed Austin from a sleepy little state capital into part of the technology powerhouse it is today. And that concept is really applicable for when you look at climate change. The regulatory side won't do it by itself. The companies can't do it by itself. Academia can't do it. The financing has to be there. But the one thing that is missing in most of the discussions, and we talked about this yesterday on Sharif's session, is you've got to have the common citizens involved. You have to have education for them to see the impact. You know, if I am struggling to put food on my table, I'm going to worry more about that than climate change. If I cannot get health care for a sick person, if I cannot do the things that are necessary for human health and sustenance, it's going to be hard for me to do anything on health or climate change. And so that is the other missing element here, is that we really have to go ahead and put those elements in place and recognize, again, that this is a system of systems problem. And many of the times when we talk about what we're seeing, for example, over in Italy, they are now building apartment building towers with forest on the outside. You were talking about going to Singapore earlier. If you begin to look at Singapore with some of their capture systems over there and scrubbing the atmosphere, those are all great point solutions. But we really need to go beyond that and attack is what it is. It's a complex systems and systems problem, which in my world, one of my expertise is creating wicked problem roadmaps. And this is the epitome of a wicked problem. So Dr. Sharif, thank you.
Mr. Rob.
Well, I'm going to try something different. I think climate change is a marketing problem. And let me explain. We currently know what needs to be done. We've all discussed, I think, ad nauseum, the kinds of things that need to happen to mitigate climate change. And I've covered a number of things that need to happen so that individuals could better protect themselves against climate change. The issue is the folks that are against mitigation have budget, and they are very effective at using their budget to create marketing dollars to convince people that climate change either is real or it's something that they shouldn't worry about. When you're trying to move a population, whether it be a population in a town, city, state, country, you have to have a way to reach them and convince them that your argument is correct and get them all pointed in the right direction. That's a marketing problem. At this juncture, we have a lot of scientists focused on climate change. We have a lot of engineers focused on climate change. Anybody want to name the number of marketing folks we've got focused on climate change? The thing is that we have some, but the thing is the very little money's going into convincing people of what it is they need to do. In fact, if we look at one of our biggest issues right now and looking over at the UN is the fact that it's not clear to me that we can do anything as a global community at the moment that is significant. For instance, if an asteroid were to pop up tomorrow and you had 6 months to build a defense against the asteroid and it would require a global effort, it would probably take 6 months just to come to agreement as to what that global effort would be, and then we'd be dead. In fact, probably more than 6 months. We'd talk probably if people lived, they would probably be arguing 20 years from now about what should have been done. And what would need to happen is everybody would have to get on the same page rather rapidly. The nations would have to pivot, and we'd have to field a defense for the asteroid hit. And I see no capability of being able to do that. It's perhaps a nation might be able to do it if they already had an existing space program. Now, we certainly had a number of movies that talked about that. But the thing is we know right now that no one nation is likely to be able to field something that would be able to prevent the kind of asteroid that took out the dinosaurs. And that same kind of asteroid could take us out just as easily. And that's something we know about. I mean, we at least believe the dinosaurs were taken out by an asteroid. We certainly know that there are asteroids blowing by us at high speed on a regular basis. We get excited when it happens, but we haven't really developed a planetary defense against it. We're assuming the odds, which are long, that an asteroid will hit us will not cause that event to happen in our lifetimes. And what if we're wrong? So in the end, with all our science and technology, we're no better protected against that kind of an event. We now could see it coming, which I'm not too sure is a positive. I mean, if the world's going to end and you can do nothing about it, do you really want to know? That seems to be an odd thing to fix. Is giving people a heads up they're going to die and yet not being able to do anything to prevent that particular outcome. Yet that's kind of where we are with climate change. We're really good at pointing out that hey, this is going bad and it's going bad faster and faster. In other words, the rate of decay of the climate is happening at an increasing rate. It's not static. And yet we're all acting like, hey, the odds are it's not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is it's almost certain it's going to happen. And this idea of we're going to go to Mars or some other place and terraform it is kind of nuts, given the fact we haven't been able to figure out how to re-terraform our own planet and make it more livable. And it'd be a heck of a lot easier to terraform where we're currently living to make it healthier than it is going to be to repopulate an atmosphere on Mars, which lost its magnetic field and lost its atmosphere as a result. In fact, we even have a pretty good idea of what happened to Mars. It was a solar event that took out Mars's atmosphere, a solar event that could as easily happen to us, and we have no protection against that either. even on an individual basis, we have no protection against that occurring. So in the end, we have a lot of things that can be catastrophic to the race that would just end us overnight, and very few methods in order to mitigate those underlying problems. And I think somehow fixing that, regardless of which problem we're trying to address, a solar event, an asteroid, climate change. Hey, we're even now discussing alien invasion. I'm not talking about terrestrial aliens, I'm talking about space aliens. I don't know if anybody else watched the congressional hearings on the aliens, but that was kind of fascinating. And what was even more fascinating is I would have thought this would have been a front page news for several weeks, and instead it just kind of got buried by the stuff going on in politics, which is kind of okay. So you've got a guy that stole the election, and you've got space aliens. If somebody had asked me 20 years ago which was going to be front page, I would have said space aliens for sure. And no, it's Trump. So our ability to even prioritize what we're focusing on in terms of global change and threat seems to be just almost non-existent, and until something happens, and then we overpivot, and often we then spend a crap ton of money on the wrong things because we didn't do the analysis first, and we just started writing checks. I mean, take the move to electric cars. Move to electric cars is supposed to really help climate change, right? So what have we done to ensure the electric car infrastructure? I'm just reading a report right now that I think it's 5 out of 9 times people try to use public chargers, they don't work. Which is, I mean, how are you going to convince people to drive electric cars if the damn public chargers don't work? You're not. And now we've got a bunch of cars, my own cars, under recall, and I've received a note saying I should be charging it outside the house because if it goes up, it's going to take out my house. The fact of the matter is we shouldn't be using lithium-ion batteries this size. I mean, they are extremely dangerous. We've had lithium-ion batteries almost take down planes, both in laptops and in the power systems that were put in the Dreamliners, the Boeing Dreamliner. So we shouldn't be using them. And the reason we're using lithium-ion is we spent, I think, something like 60 years not doing advanced battery research because we figured nickel metal hydride and lead acid were good enough. Just stupid stuff, and a lot of those restrictions were put in place to make sure we didn't put petrochemical cars at risk. So our ability to prioritize, to focus, to put people's minds on a singular task of preventing the end of the race appears to be non-existent. And I would say in terms of priority, that probably fixing that should be priority one. If you have an ability to focus on a global problem and fix it, there are a lot of global problems you can fix, including climate change. But if you don't have the ability to do that, none of these problems are fixable. And so the first step has to be to create a mechanism to be able to address global problems, whether it's dealing with a rogue nuclear state like Russia. I mean, think about this. We're all sitting here kind of waiting hopefully that Russia's not going to launch a nuclear attack, even though they continue to say they're going to. And now they're shipping advanced nuclear missiles to North Korea, which by any extent is run by somebody that's likely to feel if he's a threat, he's likely to hit the button. And so we've got nuclear weapons in the hands of people that are likely to use them. And these nuclear weapons are thousands of times more powerful than the ones that were used on Japan and Hiroshima. And we know that if they're used in mass, the planet becomes unlivable. And yet, what are we really doing to stop it? Where is our development effort to mitigate or stop a nuclear reaction? How are we doing with anti-missile systems as opposed to the funding that's going to create the weapons of destruction in the first place? And my personal view is if somebody creates a weapon of destruction, as much money or more should go into creating something that would mitigate it. It seems obvious. If you're going to create a nuclear bomb, then somebody else is eventually going to get the technology and use it against you. So why don't you put in place the same level of effort at least to create something that would protect you against that particular thing that you created? Yet we don't do that. So even after seeing the devastating damage the weapons do, our ability to mitigate that is almost non-existent. Yes, we have anti-missile systems. We know full well they'll be inadequate in terms of number, scale, and capability. of stopping the majority of the weapons that would be launched. And that just makes no sense. I mean, we seem to be working at a breakneck speed to wipe ourselves out without being able to work at the same breakneck speed to even prevent the kinds of damage that we're likely to create ourselves. So as we look at climate change and the ability to fix it, my view is first, we've got to create a mechanism to deal with global threats. If we have a mechanism to deal with global threats, then we can focus it on individual threats as they pop up, and we have a reasonably good chance of mitigating the problem. If we don't have a mechanism to deal with global threats, then it doesn't really matter what the threat is. We can't fix it, and so we can go around arguing and jumping up and down and yelling at each other in terms of who should be doing what, but we haven't created the mechanism to fix the problem. If you've got a problem that needs a tool, you have to create the tool before you fix the problem. We're not doing that. We're yelling and screaming about the problem, but we don't have the tools yet to address problems of this scale, and perhaps that should be our focus. It's not just global warming we're facing, whether it's and I keep using space aliens, but I'm just kind of fascinated about the lack of interest in that. But an asteroid, a solar event, and we could have even a scientific event that could take us out. It still bothers me a great deal when they did the analysis on the Hadron Collider, which there was a theory, much like there was with the atomic bomb, that if the Hadron Collider was started, that it could create a sustainable black hole that would consume the planet, and probably more. But the fact is that it consumes the planet, and our interest in what happens to the black hole is pretty much over. And they came up with a calculation how remote it was. I think it was something like 10 magnitudes wrong in the wrong direction. I mean, it's still remote, but when you hear that the analysis of the danger was off by something like 10 magnitudes, it's kind of like, oh, I mean, it shouldn't be that way. And what that tells you is the people that wanted to do the Hadron Collider and the people that wanted to make sure that it was done safely were unbalanced, and the people that wanted to do it had the louder voice, and that's problematic. It was problematic when we created the nuclear bomb. It's problematic when we created the Hadron Collider. We're still around. It didn't kill us. But the thing is eventually we're going to create something, and somebody's going to do the analysis, and they're going to say it's going to be reasonable, and we're going to be gone. And so we might not even be around to experience the major aspects of climate change. We're going to take ourselves out before that. So we need a way to moderate a lot of our activities to make sure that we also don't create the very thing that wipes us out. And if climate change is man-made, and of course most of us believe it is, that's exactly the case we're facing. It's a man-made disaster. And the way you stop a man-made disaster is you stop doing whatever you're doing that creates the disaster. It's pretty simple. It's not a difficult problem. If you're holding your head underneath the water and you're suffocating, you could do a couple things. You could develop new technology to give you air underneath the water, or you could lift your head out of the damned ocean. Yes, we're on this particular path that suggests, okay, science is going to fix our underlying problem, when the easiest path would just to be stop creating the damage. Yet we just don't have a mechanism to drive that particular behavior. So my argument right now is to say one of the things we need to address is the fact we cannot deal with global catastrophes. So UN was supposed to do that, but self-serving countries that set it up wanted to make sure the UN couldn't dictate what they were doing, and thus the UN was broken in concept. We need something like the UN that actually has authority and can execute that authority against every nation, not just some of them and some of them poorly. The UN has to be an independent body focused on preserving the race and the planet, and be able to act independently against any member nation when necessary to protect the planet. And without that, it is pretty pointless. Yes, it's an area for discussion and whining and carrying on and passing rules and regulations that can't be enforced. I mean, put it another way, we've got The Hague, and we've got the ability to go after criminals at a national basis. And we have taken Putin, the president of Russia, and he is now a criminal. If he leaves Russia, he can be arrested and he can be incarcerated. So, except he's got to leave Russia and land in a country that's likely to incarcerate him. And of course, he's not going to do that. So even those kind of mechanisms just fundamentally aren't working. And that's relatively minor compared to climate change, asteroids, space aliens, solar events. And so the mechanism we need to create is something that allows us to work globally to address threats, big and small, that address the global population. And until we get that, I'm just not convinced we're going to be able to stop climate change. And it still takes me back to what we may be able to do is maybe able to convince people to build better homes, build better shelters, to live a more individually safer life. So at least they're more likely to survive in an event. And granted, the people that are fighting the event are not going to do any of this stuff. And then the event solves one of the underlying problems by wiping out the people that are preventing the mitigation, which sounds like a really cruel way to deal with things. But we kind of saw that in the US during the pandemic. One part, which was really kind of bizarre, because one party came up with the vaccine, and that same party was the one that didn't want to use the vaccine, which is just, to me, it's like I'm still scratching my head how the hell that happened. And the other party that didn't create the vaccine was using it heavily. And if the pandemic had gone off the rails, the one that wasn't using the vaccine would have self-corrected; they'd be dead. And of course, we know from statistics that those that didn't take the vaccine, the groups that didn't take the vaccine, died at a much higher rate than those that did. And yet, was that a learning event? Not really. It didn't convince the people that had made the mistake that they made the mistake. In fact, they doubled down in most cases and argued that no, we were right, you were wrong. The fact that we're still alive and didn't take the vaccine proves that we were absolutely correct, even though a lot of their friends, family, and acquaintances passed following the same rules. I mean, I was still fascinated about some of the pastors that popped up and said, "Don't take it was evil," and died. It was just shortly thereafter. And yet, you would think that would be a learning moment. I mean, so you sit back and you watch that. Why didn't people learn from this? But they did not. And that takes me back to the original premise, the original where I started, where we've got a marketing problem. If we want to get people driven to do something that's smart, we have to market to them the information that they need to come to that correct decision. And the power of marketing, it's like any other tool, it can be used for good and it can be used for ill. And right now, marketing is being used very successfully to get people to do stupid stuff, and not being used successfully at all, in my view, to get people to be smart. And if we can at least get a marketing effort funded at least an equivalent level of petrochemical industries and the NRA and some of the other groups that are working against the betterment of society, then we have a tool to convince large portions of the population to act in their best interest. But if we don't even do that, if we can't even come up with the funding and capability to do that relatively simple thing compared to actually trying to fix climate change, then I don't know how we get there. We don't have a global mechanism to execute. We don't have a global mechanism to convince, and yet we're trying to deal with a global problem that would require both things to be in place. And yet none of our focus seems to be going into either issue, and that we seem to be trying to go after the problem without the adequate tools. And we're a tools race. What differentiates us from the animals supposedly is our ability to create tools, and yet we are not focused on creating the very tools we need to survive, which I think is problematic. Then I'll pass.
Thank you. Mr. Michael Rothschild, what's your concluding remarks for today's session? Dr. Michael. Can you unmute, please?
Yeah. Okay. Just, one thing that comes to mind, I go all the way back to what I said before. You mentioned marketing. We really have to education. So I went to this that my dad told me when I was 10, and it was kind of controversial. I didn't see very much before Here Comes the Aliens. It popped up on the screen. I don't know how that happens from the up there and listen, but one of the things that Dad taught me when I was growing up was really hard to believe is, I'm too Christian, run, grow up in the States, and in Israel, and believe in Christianity, but my dad, felt strange in that field. But he, started studying hieroglyphics and met a guy by the name of attention, and he looked just like his father. And this is when I was 2 years old. I'm 46 now, so I got shoved down through since I was a child. Aliens had invaded the planet because it was too hot to find gold and stuff. And so it sounds strange, but the planet Nibiru got hit by
Michael, you're breaking up so bad. I don't know if everybody else can make out what you're saying, but you're breaking up so bad I actually can't make out the words you're saying.
maybe if I switch positions, and I don't go over and tell any fiction stories because this is on. This was found in Egypt. And Aramaic discovery of Aramaic text was done by a few scientists. One of his name was attention. Hear me clearly, Rob.
Yeah, sorry, you're still breaking up.
Okay, just one second.
Quite a bit. I think it's I think it might be a bandwidth issue. It sounds like your bandwidth is constricted, and what's happening is it's overly compressing your language, and so you're just getting.
How is it now?
I'm getting like now about 4 out of 5 words, so I can understand you.
Okay, great. So, are you hearing me clearly now?
A little bit better.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention that I grew up with my father. My mother lived in Israel, and my dad was 10 was that aliens had invaded our planet from planet Nibiru, and planet Nibiru. And my mom used to tell me, "Oh, son, don't worry, this is just the fallen over in Mount Hermon." And that's north of Israel. And I said, "The fallen angels." So I'm looking at Genesis and the Bible, and I'm Judeo-Christian, so I'm thinking this is, why would these guys come from another planet down to our planet? And the theory was just that it was too hot there. The solar system had, it was too hot, so they came down here to mine gold and spread in their solar system monazite gold. That's what as a kid. Jesus is my favorite God, although I'm Jewish. Jesus. But that's what I was taught from
we're back to being unable to tell. I'm talking space aliens, and you now sound like you're a space alien.
I guess
I'm not able to make out the words.
Yeah, they're not going to want me to say much of this, so maybe I won't.
See, now
say
you're perfectly clear.
Well, great. Well, supposedly there's a planet Nibiru that got hit by an asteroid. The Anunnaki came down to the Earth to mine the gold, to take it back to their atmosphere, to spread it all over the place, to prevent the heat from. It was blistering hot on their things, and all this was shown in hieroglyphics and in Egypt. And so, this was crammed down my throat when I was young by my father, while my mom was just saying, "Hey, those are just the fallen angels over in Mount Hermon in the north of Israel." And my dad was saying, no, these are the, Anunnaki from the planet Nibiru. And I'm like, hey, Jesus is my favorite God. Regardless of if these creatures or these people came down from the planet Nibiru to mine the gold, there's a gold currency issue. If there's no more gold, there's no more dollar, this and that. Bottom line, it's got to be something to do with educating each individual, like Rob said. There could be aliens invading. Sometimes I feel like I'm an Anunnaki because of what my dad has taught me growing up. Like I said, my mom, believes in the angels falling down, and so forth. So, but bottom line, we really need to start with education. It's got to be started with education because most people, I was just in Kenya, and I think it was in over December and January of this year, right before Switzerland, and the bottom line is if you can teach a basic education to the people in Kenya, it helps a lot. Littering, they don't have proper waste disposal and so forth. So, it's a global approach. It can't be just the United Nations because, like Rob said, it takes 6 months to a year just to make a decision. They're doing the best they can, I would imagine. It's got to be a little bit quicker. I think AI and some of the newer technology is going to help a lot. I'll be anxious to hear what David has to say.
Well, thank you so much for that one. I actually believe with some of what both of y'all said, but my only view on it is aliens are not necessarily from another planet. They could be from other environments too, other dimensions, other elements like that. And a lot of evidence for a lot of different things that we still need to work through those. And I love the work that one of the other nonprofits is doing in that space. The thing out in California called To the Stars, beginning to pull some really neat materials to that. And I cannot believe how much we're seeing disclosures, not just of things like that, but now of planets everywhere that can support growth and population, of finding water on numbers of planets and moons and other things. And, 10 years ago, there was nothing. And just look at what's happened in the last decade. I would love to, as one of my concluding remarks on this, go back and say again, it's going to take a wide variety of tools, of technologies, of regulatory activities, of education to begin to make the dents that need to be happen. Some of the pavilions at Expo 2020, which happened in Dubai a couple of years ago, were tremendous ones of looking at some of what is possible, but then they were on the micro scale. How do we take and grow those to a global scale? How can we begin to look at them? One of the promising technologies I talked about yesterday on this program is the very, very rapid growth that we've seen in miniature nuclear power plants, modular nuclear power plants, down at the range where they can be used for point of use power generation, to power data centers, to power factories, zero emissions. The pollution of even from the nuclear reaction in it is minor because they're so small. Our safety record of those above submarine ships, spacecraft, actually extremely good. And we need to look at options like that. Just because the N word, the nuclear word, was forbidden for so long, it needs to come back on the plate today. And these modular nuclear reactors, these mini nuclear reactors, which now have multiple companies producing them, both in the United States and globally, need to come into play to help solve this problem. It is the cleanest of all the energy sources besides hydroelectric that we have today. And we just don't have enough water and dependable water to push hydroelectrics much more. But Sharif, we need to tackle the system of systems problem. And I hope we make fantastic progress. And at the next COP meeting, can report that progress out.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. What's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I'll keep it simple. Unless we can create the tools to deal with problems like this, it's my view we're not going to be able to deal with this timely or effectively. At some particular point, the population will either pass or it will come to the conclusion that it needs to put in place the resources and the focus needed to fix the problem. I doubt it's going to happen in my lifetime. But the priority right now should be to try to create a way to message and penalize the companies and individuals that are causing harm, and give credit to and status to the people that are attempting and successfully mitigating the problem. I mean, we could hold up Finland as kind of the gold example of a country that is operating at kind of its peak and doing it right. And if every country were to emulate Finland, I'm convinced we wouldn't have a climate change disaster anymore. But that's a marketing effort, and so we need kind of a global marketing effort that can mitigate what companies and rich individuals can do to do harm, and convey accurate information and get the populations focused on preserving themselves and creating a higher quality of life. It's not just with regard to climate change. It amazes me how many people don't even know that Finland is considered the happiest country on the planet. I mean, wouldn't you want to live in a happy country? I mean, I would. It just seems to be kind of obvious. So why doesn't everybody know that? And why aren't we all looking at Finland and saying, why aren't we doing what Finland's doing? If they're the happiest country, why don't we want to live in the happiest country and have competition between the countries, and particularly between the politicians, on who can create the happiest population? And I got to tell you, I'm not particularly happy being surrounded by fires at the moment. That might create the right priorities and focus folks on the right thing. But right now, it's money that tends to drive decisions, and the people that have money are often the companies that are doing the most harm, because they're not being charged for the harm they're doing. In effect, they're making their money off the damage they're doing to the population, and they're not being held accountable for it. And so if we can't even fix that little problem, we can't focus people on creating better lives for themselves, or even informing them on what that path would be, I'm just not convinced we can do any of this. And so I see this as a major problem in terms of marketing, conviction, and the ability to convince people to do what's best for them. The people that are able to convince folks to do things that are harmful, take some horse medicine to mitigate a virus, or that war and the war that they're committing against a neighbor is beneficial and was caused by Nazis that didn't exist in the country. This is kind of nuts. Disinformation and misinformation are probably the biggest problem we face as a global economy. And unless we can figure out a way to mitigate that, we're not going to get much of anything done, and we'll continue to be our own worst enemy. I was reminded the other day in talking at a robotic forum about how the fictional Skynet came to be, and it came to be much the same way that the Forbin project came up and some of the other movies came up, is that we created an AI. The AI looked out and studied history and said, the way I can preserve the planet and myself is I get rid of the humans. And honestly, if you look at how we're behaving right now, you can kind of see how an artificial intelligence or any intelligence might come to that conclusion. We're our own worst enemy. And until we fix that, until we stop being our own worst enemy and start working globally. I mean, I'm not saying individually. Individually, we've got individuals that are just out there championing stuff like crazy. But this isn't a problem individuals can fix. This is a problem that requires all hands on deck. And the way you get all hands on deck is by getting rid of the misinformation, penalizing those people that are carrying it forward, and particularly those that are doing so in a self-serving fashion to increase their own short-term income. And making sure that people have access to the truth, and I do mean the truth. I don't mean creating a counter message that is equally false to motivate people to do what we think is the right thing, because that would be a corrupting influence, and that particular mechanism would eventually spin and work against us. We have to be honest with each other. We have to look at the research, and we have to make our decisions based on facts, not based on what we would like to be the reality that we want, or what some bogus politician has told us is reality. We need to know what reality is. And until we're willing to do that, until we're willing to fund at least that much of the effort, I really doubt we're going to make much progress. And so our priority should be, first and foremost, to create the tools we'll need to mitigate the problem. We can't just jump that step and try to move to mitigation. It won't work. We have to create the tools first. And one of those tools is the ability to convince the population to do what's best for them. Not what's best for me, but best for them. And they can only do that if they value the information, if they have access to the information, if somebody curates the information to make sure it's accurate. And we're not there. My hope is someday we will be. My doubt is it won't happen in my lifetime. And thanks, I'll pass back to you, Dr. Sharif. And that's it. And it looks like we just at that moment, we lost Dr. Sharif, which just goes to show how much technology is working for us these days.
Well, if he doesn't come back on, Rob, I want to thank you and David both. It was an honor and a pleasure to meet both of you. David, you're always welcome in Asia. If you ever do get a chance to come back over here, Rob, I'm really sorry to hear that you're surrounded by fires. I hope some of those come out. It really was an honor to meet both of you guys. I'll try to get your information. I'd love to hear more about the different dimensions, because it seems as though there's, as Chinese believe in several, like 18 different dimensions or something. And there seems to be things going very different over here than anywhere else I've been, including Jerusalem. So I really appreciate you guys being on the call with me, and I've learned so much tonight, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps we had to do a session on the multiverse, on the underlying concepts of the multiverse, or even time travel. Because with regard to the theories surrounding the aliens, that they range everywhere from dimensional travel to alternate timelines to time travel, and there are really some solid arguments on each one. So we'll see how this all works out. It still fascinates me though that we have a congressional hearing on it. And you would think of that
Pentagon
going ballistic.
The Pentagon opened it up. And, I lived in Eglin Air Force Base in Gulf Breeze, Florida growing up. And I mean, we saw UFOs pretty much every day. I saw UFOs every day for 10 years of my life, not every day, but at least 3 or 4 times a month, just, on Gulf Breeze and Gulf Breeze, Florida. And it was right next to our Air Force Base. I mean, I'm really more interested in what David was talking about, like these different dimensionals, like it could just be sitting like a ghost or something. I don't know. It's, it's obviously that there's people from outer space right here amongst us. One of you guys said that, and then they might be going back and forth or something like that. Personally,
Michael,
I've never.
One of my best friends here in Austin, he received a lifetime award from Academy of Physics. He ran the remote viewing project when he was at Stanford. He's one of the major UAP advisors inside that world. And I've had fantastic discussions with him on this, both at the unclassified and classified levels. So a lot of things happening there.
Looks like Sharif's back and we can get him to close us out.
Hey, Sharif, we were waiting for you to say goodbye. And how many episodes?
Thank you. It's 964th episode.
Wow. Mazel tov. Thank you, Sharif. I will be back anytime. All the best. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to invite you in our board members, so you can join in our board in World Talent Economy Forum as an advisor. Mr. Rob, Mr. David Smith, all of them are advisors, so you can get a great team to contribute in the global economy. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.